you were going to create a magic pill for teenagers that you could put, one or two or even up to three bits of understanding in the pill, so that by taking the pill, they would see three things, what would you put in the pill? If it was for their mental health, for their...
I would put the understanding that we live in the experience of our thinking and not in a direct experience of the outside world, even though it often seems like that. Yeah. And obviously that would want discussion and thinking through and learning. I would put that acceptance in life is so important, that so much upset, distress, stress and anxiety come from not being able to accept what life has put in your domain. I wouldn't even say in your way, has presented to you. And I suppose the third one would be about one's innate well-being.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Might Help, Can't Hurt, conversations with leaders, doers, and friends. I'm very excited to have my first repeat guest since we began this whole thing when the pandemic began, Professor Anthony Kessel. Anthony, welcome.
Hi, Michael. Great to be back again. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. We were just reminiscing. Remember the good old days when we first spoke? COVID had just arrived and it was absolute freaking chaos.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I think that was about a year and a half ago when we had that conversation, and we were talking about the pandemic. We were talking about uncertainty. We were talking about the pandemic and the awareness of uncertainty and the insecurity, as well as obviously also the dreadful pandemic itself. But things have moved on since then to a certain degree.
Well, I was going to say, really, it feels like there's still COVID, there's still uncertainty, but they have.
Yeah.
So now, look, I was asking you before we came on to give me a week in the life, and I thought, oh no, this is too good an answer to waste on me when we're not on air. So what's a week in your life right now? I told him he could lie, by the way. I told him he could make up a different story.
I have what I'd call something of a mosaic lifestyle, which I really thoroughly enjoy at the moment, and has the kind of balance I've yearned for some time. So my week involves 3 days a week in the NHS, where I'm clinical director at headquarters in charge of something called National Clinical Policy. I've been overseeing all the COVID therapeutic policies for hospitals. And in the other days, professionally, I'm the Senior Public Health Advisor to the Football Association, the FA, here in England, and also to Senior Advisor to the UK film industry on COVID. But also I do a lot of writing, creative writing, sometimes academic writing, but as you know, in particular at the moment, fiction and creative writing. Bring
it up, because I was going to bring up my copy and realized I gave it to you, which I thought was ultimately a good thing that I did.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. That is The 5 Clues is the first book in the 4-book Don't Doubt the Rainbow series, and you've kindly read and given a review of that. This is a book for it's a young adult book, so it's for 11 plus, especially 11 to 15. And it is, on the one level, it's a straightforward children's detective adventure story about a 13-year-old girl, Edie, who discovers a year after her mother's supposedly accidental death. Her mum's a human rights investigator. She's at the stone setting. She finds her mum's left her a note. I don't want to spoil or give too much away, but her mum's left her a set of clues to finish the investigation she was doing, involving a public health story that ends up being strangely prescient because it was written before the pandemic.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Because the book hinges. So first off, the mystery is really good. I will do a little spoiler. There are 5 clues. But so the whole idea of the sort of, artificially created and accidentally spread was not COVID related when you were first read it.
There were numerous elements of the book that have turned out to be weirdly, prescient or something broader, beyond which we understand. I mean, the first part of that is that I wrote the outline of this story and the first 2 or 3 chapters over a decade ago. And they sat on the shelf whilst I did other things, wrote a cat book for younger children and so forth. So I wrote the first 2 or 3 chapters, including the idea of a mother who leaves a note after she dies that her daughter finds. And about a year after that happened, as I've recounted at the back of the book in a section called Note from the Author, but about a year after that happened, my own mum very suddenly died at the age of 70. She had a brain aneurysm, and no one was really able to say goodbye or anything like that. And in the month after she passed, we couldn't find all her administrative affairs, her bank statement. We knew she had all them all. And eventually, a month after her passing, my family and I were at my dad's house. And we moved everything in one room, all the boxes and crates around, and found her box files with everything in it in a small cupboard in the corner. Took them to the table in the kitchen and opened the first box file. And there was a note from my mum to me and my 2 sisters. And it was a note if I should die. And it was a personal note, so I'm not going to go on about what was in it. But it was very, very weird in the sense of I'd written the outline of a story about a mother who leaves a note for her child. And there are all kinds of other elements that are prescient. I'd written the public health story. There aren't a million children's detective books that have a public health story at the heart. Yeah. In fact, I don't know whether I've read any. But this was written, before the pandemic, absolutely. And there are people, public health leaders in this country, who helped advise me on some of the virology aspects and so forth, who were thanked in the acknowledgements. So it was very strange when this huge pandemic hit. Obviously strange on all kinds of levels, but from the perspective of the book, that was quite weird.
Yeah. Now, did that sort of encourage you in your writing, or kind of freak you out and make you go, okay, I'm only going to write things where the characters turn out really well, just in case?
Well, no, it was, first of all, when the pandemic hit, it felt odd. And in the sense that I'd written this story, which was going to be fresh and different and new. And then the pandemic came, and everything is still public health all around the globe. And the thinking with the publishers and with my editors and so forth was, oh dear, are people going to want to read about a public health story when all this awfulness is going on around the globe? But as time has settled, it's become apparent that it doesn't really matter. And the truth, and when you're writing a children's story, in fact, I'd say public health has become more central to people's understanding. Organizations like Public Health England, which feature in the book, the National Agency, are now commonplace. People know what it is. So that's been quite helpful. And also in children's books in particular, although there's a story, you'll really tend to be writing about themes that are relevant to children, hopefully in an exciting, thrilling way. But you're writing about growing up, you're writing about social relationships, friendships. Yeah. In this book, about grief, about family dynamics, about loss. So those themes of human existence and human development are there nonetheless. And I think, and that's what holds it together, really.
Now, why did you choose young adults? Like, why was that the target audience? As opposed to like before with the cat books, which I remember reading, but I don't remember what they were called. But
so there was one cat, the Amazing Adventures of Perch the Cat, which was for age 5 to 8. And this book, as I said, is for 11 plus. The reason is that I think it's an incredibly important formative period in one's life. And it's formative in so many ways, developmentally. It's a time that you're beginning to take responsibility. It's the time that you're engaging in more challenging social relationships. Sexual relationships are starting. So it's a really formative period or time in people's lives. And it's also a time where increasingly mental health and problems around psychological well-being become prevalent. And I'll come back to that, but obviously the psychological well-being is a very central theme to this whole series as well. But we know now that, and I say this more as a physician than an author, but there is such a rise in mental health problems in adults and children. But, services in this country and globally, certainly in the Western world, are getting overwhelmed. Outpatients, emergency attendances, primary care attendances, they can't cope with the rise in depression and stress and obsessive compulsive disorders, eating disorders, and so forth. So there's a real rise in those problems, especially in children and young adults. And we believe that about 75% of, by the age 25, about 75% of mental health or disorders that adults have will show by the age of 25. Yeah. And I know you have some experience of that yourself, and many people will have, but they do show by then. People think, sorry, 75% by 18, it's 50% it's 75% by 25 and 50% by 18. Right. So by 18, a lot of those problems are already there. So the idea is, if one can, what I'm trying to do is introduce ideas to support psychological well-being through fiction. And if one could do that at this age, 11 to 15, 16, there's an opportunity to really make a difference.
Right. Now, how old are your kids?
My children are now, my daughter will be 21 in a couple of months. My son is turning 18 on Sunday.
All right. So dad to dad. Right? Because mine are now all in their 20s. Well, is Maisie 20 yet? She's not quite. I don't know, but they're all around that age. How much did your psychological well-being and understanding of psychological well-being impact the way they developed and grew up? You don't have to go into detail, but because it was very interesting to me as a teacher of this. How much to teach and how much to model, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
So I think, it's difficult to know, but I certainly can describe that I became first involved or aware of the three principles understanding of how the mind works, or the inside out understanding, probably about a decade ago. So they would have been about 10 and 8 then. Yeah. And that understanding, which has nurtured and developed and been transformative to my own life, has happened over the last decade. So I think there's no doubt in my mind, not so much through teaching the children, because at times they're interested, at times they're not, at times it's annoying. I remember I speak to Dickin Bettinger, my friend and mentor, and he says when his children, how much it annoyed them when he'd always go on about it. But it affects your relationship with them simply by how you are, simply by the listening, the being present, the empathy. That doesn't mean you can't have those as a human being without this three principles understanding. But I'm pretty sure it's made a real difference to my relationships with them. And I'm delighted and privileged to say I have fantastic relationships, quite different relationships with both of them, but they're strong and they're deep and they're poignant. And now as they get older, they are, close friends as much as my children. And it's quite beautiful, really.
Yeah. Well, that's very similar to my experience. It didn't make sense most of the time to teach, but they've all been vocal about, it being affected both in terms of what they've seen and what they've learned, but also the humanness of it.
Yeah.
Because they see that even though I have a three principles understanding, I still lose it when my football team loses. Like I still,
Yeah.
It's not like you through a deeper understanding of psychological well-being, you become you're still deranged, but it's just not so much of a problem.
Well, and on the football theme, we've had plenty of that, because I live about a mile or two from the Emirates, and my son and I are very, very strong Arsenal fans, and it's not been a good season or two. So we've had plenty of that to get through. But I think the other element is when, on top of the depth of relationship, that I think the understanding fosters or facilitates. On top of that, when your children encounter problems, they may or may not be overt mental health problems or psychological well-being challenges. They could just be the more commonplace problems that people encounter. I do think one is better placed with a deeper understanding to support them, help navigate their way through those issues.
Okay, so let me ask the first
really
unfair
great. Yeah.
question. Let me ask the first unfair question, which suggests there'll be more. I don't know if there'll be more, but if you were going to create a magic pill for teenagers that you could put, one or two or even up to three bits of understanding in the pill, so that by taking the pill they would see three things, what would you put in the pill if it was for their mental health, for their...
I would put the understanding that we live in the experience of our thinking and not in a direct experience of the outside world, even though it often seems like that. Yeah. And obviously that would want discussion and thinking through and learning. I would put that acceptance in life is so important, that so much upset, distress, stress and anxiety come from not being able to accept what life has put in your domain. I wouldn't even say in your way, has presented to you.
Yeah.
Because nobody escapes in life challenges, obstacles, difficulties. It's part. I know you said before, life is a combat sport. I mean, nobody, children and adults, it's not possible. So being able to really understand that acceptance, that things happen outside of our control, and that is just the nature of life, but that being able to accept that in the moment is absolutely vital in terms of one's own. It's a reflection of one's own resilience, but in enabling one to move on with grace through life and flourish in life. And I suppose the third one would be about one's innate well-being. And this is something I feel, very deeply myself, that we all have inside us that energy of life, that thing, that spark that I, as a doctor, scientist, nobody really knows what it is, but that energy, that spark that makes things alive rather than those things that are inert. And that remains there. That's what gives us, powers us with the extraordinary human sort of capabilities to nurture, to love, to be creative, to inspire others, one's own, innate well-being. And that's always there. And that sometimes may feel that spark is diminished or dampened. And sometimes it feels like that spark is absolutely alive and flourishing. But it's always there. And no matter what hits you in life or what confronts you in life, it can't be taken away. We often say no body or no thing can take that away. And it's really very true. It is a belief rather than a cognitive understanding, but it's, if one is able to develop and nurture that true belief, it's incredibly powerful. It can't be taken away. You think it can be, but it can't be. And that provides hope, encouragement for people, children, mental health, that even though things might not feel good at the moment, that things will change, that spark's not taken away, and it will flourish again in the future. So those would be my three.
All right, I'm going to start trying to rush it through for FDA. Come back to me in 3 years and see where we're at.
Put it ahead of the COVID therapeutics.
Oh, so, well, have you, in your role as sort of advisor over the last sort of 18 months, have you taken any role in the mental health side of things, or has it been focused on the disease and disease control side?
Well, primarily in my role in the disease control, but because I look after, a team or a department, of course, there's been all kinds of, challenges supporting people through the pandemic as you would support your friends and family. But no, my role largely professionally has been overseeing the development of these national policies that decide who will get those 6 or 7 or 8 drugs that work against COVID in hospitals or in the community. And that's been a fascinating learning experience in of itself, how we create rule guidelines and policies in the context of great scientific uncertainty. Normally we have lots of research and evidence. In an emergency, in a pandemic, you have very little evidence. And it's brought out all those things that are amazing about human beings and also can be quite challenging about human beings. Some people finding it very difficult to operate with all this scientific uncertainty. Some people flourishing and saying, well, we have to make decisions. We'll do the best we can. What else can we draw on? So it's been fascinating. And on the mental health side, well, there's been friends and family, and even within my own space, there's been mental health challenges around negotiating, getting through the pandemic, and certainly with colleagues at work. Absolutely.
Well, let's go sideways, because one of the other things so we've talked dad to dad. Let's talk writer to writer. So do you find writing easy, or do you find it like what's your experience of writing?
I think that in another life, I may not have been a doctor and would have been a writer, because I think that I've always loved reading and writing. From being a kid, I was finishing the latest 3 Mysteries book when my dad was shouting to come down and watch the Bond film at a time when Bond films weren't on all the time on telly, and because I was engrossed in books. So I've always read widely and written widely, and I've loved my career as a doctor. There's no regrets about that. But I think that creative spark, desire, interest in writing has always been there, and it's been expressed. I studied philosophy after medicine, as you know, and got involved in medical ethics and wrote a lot about medical philosophy and medical ethics. So I think it was always trying to come out. And it's now come out, and for me, feels quite wonderfully and perfectly. It's coming out in its true creative force. And I don't know about you, but I feel that when I'm writing, I feel incredibly, especially when I'm writing creatively, writing these books. This is the 4 books of these. I'm just finishing book 2 at the moment. But when I am immersed and engrossed and writing, I feel there's a connection with my inner self, with being in the zone that we've talked about sports stars and others feel when they're really immersed. But it is quite incredible and I find quite beautiful. It's all the mental chatter disappears, and I just feel connected with what I'm doing in the present moment. In some ways, I think it's the most present I sometimes feel. So does it come easy? Yes, when that's in flow, that's quite lovely. There's also the element of having sort of a lot going on in one's life. So and publishers' deadlines and pressures and so forth, which mean you can't always be luxuriating as easily as you might wish to be.
That was what I wanted to ask, because so you and I are both, we fit writing in, as opposed to, like, I have friends who are writers who literally take time off all their other work and write. And I've never, that's just comical to me, the idea. But how, logistically, how do you fit it into your day? Because you have 1 or 2 other things on.
I have 1 or 2 other things on. I find some time ago when when the cat book came out, the crime writer Ruth Rendell befriended me. Now, she's died recently, Baroness Ruth Rendell, but she wrote about 50 books, obviously world famous. And she liked the cat book, and she invited me and my daughter round. And we spent a day there. And I remember asking her, I said to her, have you written 50 books? How have you done that? She was about in her early 80s at the time. And she said, well, it's quite easy. I started writing in my early 20s. I write for 2 hours a day. Then I walk my dog and do the creative thinking whilst I'm walking the dog for 1 or 2 hours. And I do that absolutely religiously every day. And if I write for 2 hours every single day, 6 days a week, I write a book a year. And I've been doing it for over 50 years. A book a year, 50 books. So for her, it's quite straightforward. And I related to that because I don't quite do that. I don't have the space that she quite has to do. But I will.
You need a dog too.
And I don't have a dog. You need a dog. But I do. If I write, 2 hours a day, maybe on an NHS day, I'll get up rather early and do an hour. as long as it's ticking along. But on the other days, and I've managed to create a balance now where I have more days that are not NHS days, can write for 2 or 3 hours, then if I can do that and do it, do it not intensively, but do it with intent and purpose, I will produce the pages that mean you'll do a chapter every 2 or 3 weeks, which means the book will take roughly a year. And I know some writers feel like they can't write unless they're absolutely got the creative impetus and can go weeks or months without feeling the inclination to write. I'm not that kind. I feel I need to apply. If I apply myself, once I've applied myself, the ideas and creative impetus will come to me if I'm sat there and in the right place and space.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite writing quotes. W. Somerset Maugham. I only write when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes at 9 a.m. every day.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
No, again, switching gears, but when we first spoke on air, we talked about this pandemic of uncertainty, of what that wasn't quite the phrase that you used.
The awareness of uncertainty.
Awareness of uncertainty.
Yes.
And it seems to me that element is still very much in play. And now I kind of, dancing around, because you are an official person, what you're okay to talk about and what you're not. How do you both navigate that for yourself, but then advise at a sort of a big, governmental level about things when we know it's uncertain? It's not like you can say, here, this is what to do.
Well, I suppose on a sort of professional level, it's about honesty. So when there is uncertainty around, you have to be honest about the uncertainty, and trying to mask or fob that isn't generally helping anything. I suppose my understanding really is that uncertainty exists and has always existed. It's just that human beings have the tendency to try and mask uncertainty because they're uncomfortable with uncertainty. For all of us, I don't know what's going to happen later today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Who does? There is uncertainty around us all the time. But people try to cover up that uncertainty through creating security by controlling their external circumstances as best they can, and thereby dampening down the uncertainty as much as possible. And when that gets let loose, people feel insecure. Of course, all of that is premised on a misunderstanding about the nature of uncertainty, which is what I wrote about and we talked about last time, that one's security is dependent on controlling those external circumstances, when indeed it's not. Our security is internal. However and whenever I'm able to spread that word and that understanding, I will. And that, interestingly, that piece in The Author that we talked about last time was read quite widely, including by people pretty senior in the health service who commented, and I was encouraged by they enjoyed the piece. It wasn't as if and I introduced the 3 principles understanding in that piece, and people responded well. So I try and chip away professionally. I'm not that involved in the mental health side of services nationally at the moment, but I try and chip away as much as I can, or use my professional position to foster and spread the word, so to speak, as best I can. And also through the book, I have the 3 principles understanding is introduced in this book, as I mentioned earlier, in the 5 clues, and will be through the whole series. And that's, I think, another way of trying to present to children an approach to support their own psychological well-being, both preventatively and in terms of problems that people have at the moment. So preventing those psychological health problems like stress, distress, anxiety, depression, developing in the first place. I'm a public health physician, so prevention is really important. And also helping people for whom they already exist. And I'd say the third dimension that's really important to me professionally is, through introducing people to this understanding, children especially, is enabling human flourishing. So it's not just about preventing bad things, mental illness, or treating current mental illness, but it's about helping people have children have the richest possible experience of life that they can, in which they can flourish and are filled with hope and encouragement and not despair and discouragement.
So for you personally, as you know, because you're in this position where you are being asked, I assume, to kind of predict an uncertain future, or predict the best way of handling an uncertain future.
Yeah.
For you personally, how do you navigate that?
Well, I work consistently on my understanding and my own psycho-spiritual development on an ongoing basis. So I listen, read, reflect on the 3 principles of understanding through all kinds of forum every day. So my understanding is developing. I think one learns through, I've learned through life experiences over the last few years. I've had a range of personal challenges. I've had both parents have died. My mother very suddenly, my father a couple of years ago. Wasn't quite the same thing, but there's been a range of personal problems. At the beginning of this year, I separated from my wife of 20 years after a wonderful marriage. And that was very challenging and has been, but I'm convinced that my own understanding has really helped me, supported me through a particularly challenging period. That what I talked about before, that true belief that you'll be okay, that your well-being is inside you. And as things settle, and if one's able to accept things that happen in life, which you wouldn't have necessarily wished for or weren't expecting, but you can accept those, then there is the possibility to move on and flourish, and perhaps in different directions than had been anticipated. So on a personal level, my life has been enriched over the last decade. And I think it's through ongoing psycho-spiritual development and deepening.
So last 2 questions, and they're going to be very different. So one is knowing that it's not, I'm not expecting you to actually know the future. But what do you see? Do you see us moving towards a new normal, or going back to something resembling the old normal, or where do you see this going as it continues as we get better at understanding it and managing it?
Okay, so there's quite a lot in that question, because there would be a different answer to that whether you're thinking about richer Western countries or globally, because the picture for poorer countries globally around the pandemic and what it holds for the next 2 or 3 years is, probably dramatically worse than the UK or the US as examples. But in the UK or US, I think this winter is going to be really telling. So at the moment, it seems to be that people have accepted in the UK that about 150 deaths a day, a certain level of hospital admissions, and a certain level of cases are acceptable. Now, people may agree or disagree with that, but there has been an attempt to normalize it, to start the normalizing. And my prediction is that if that carries on without the health service getting overwhelmed in the winter, then that will become from probably around next spring. So when the winter season's over, that will probably become our norm. When I travel around in the UK and London now, although you're supposed to wear your mask on the tube, on the underground, 80% of people are not. So
we noticed that. We were just in London, and
no one does it
once, and then went, okay, we're not going down there again.
No, exactly. No one does it. You go to Spain or Italy or whatever, different countries are operating differently. But here, that's normalizing, whether you think that's a good idea or not, is happening. It's really happening. And I think if the winter carries on without, there are unpredictabilities. We don't know whether there'll be a new variant. We don't know whether the impact of vaccines will wane, and therefore more of the population will become susceptible again. We don't know the impact of other circulating viruses. So it's possible that in midwinter we get a bit overwhelmed in this country. Signs are already looking like the health service will get overwhelmed. So it's not looking that good. It's looking a bit wobbly from my perspective at the moment. But if we get through that without it being really awful, then I think from next spring, what you'll see is a normalizing of essentially probably a seasonal-like illness, although at the moment it's present the whole year round, but a seasonal-like illness in due course that is worse than flu, definitely. But people basically get used to living alongside. And I think probably that'll be the same in other richer countries, and it's a much more, way more unpredictable and worse scenario for poorer countries.
Okay. Sorry, was there more? I was
no, that's. I think that's.
No, that was a good answer.
Summary. I hope it's not too bleaker, but it's an honest. It's an honest answer.
That's why I asked the question. Excuse me. The last question, and you have a little advantage because I did ask this the first time, but I'm trusting you forgot it by now. So I'm gonna make you emperor of the universe. What's your first decree?
My first decree as emperor. Well, I would come back to what we talked about at the beginning. This isn't going to be as dramatic an answer as maybe you'd hope for, but I would decree that the educational programs for children that are currently being developed in the UK and US, so I'm talking about Innate Health, the iHeart educational programs, Spark in the US, One Solution Global, the ones that are being taught to children as programs informed by this three principles understanding were ubiquitous in schools. I would do, because I just have an increasing sense that we've got this mental health crisis. We've got something that we believe could really make a difference. Let's decree and put those two things together and have more widespread adoption. What is the worst that can happen? It'll cost some money, but what's the worst that can happen? My feeling is an awful lot of good will happen.
Do you know, I'll tell you, I just remembered where that question came from because I've been asking it for a while. But I was once sitting with a member of a royal family of a country. Let's leave it at that. And they were asking about bringing it into the education system. And I was talking to them about the challenges with that. And they looked at me funny and said, no, I can just decree it.
That's right.
I was like, oh, okay. that's different.
And has it happened yet? Has it happened in that country?
It has not.
The decree hasn't been passed.
The decree has not been decreed, but it was a hell of a conversation.
Yeah,
my guest today has been Professor Anthony Kessel. Anthony, lovely to see you again.
It's lovely to see you. Thank you.
Catch up soon.
I really hope you enjoyed today's show. You can learn more at michaelneill.org. Please go over to iTunes to subscribe and rate the podcast. Until next time, have fun, learn heaps, and I'll talk with you soon.